Hi, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here moderating this panel. My name is Yaki Dayan, Dr. Yaki Dayan from Ethic Israel, and it is my pleasure to moderate this Israeli session. It's the third SUGSV in a row that we have an Israeli session, and we have over here 5 amazing stories about talent strategies. The title says FutureFit organizations. The future has changed over the last few months. I don't believe that we had this scenario on our roadmap when I met the people from the GSV in Beijing for the GT and the GES just in December. We were planning, discussing the meetings at San Diego. I don't believe that none of us had any clue that the world is going to go into such a pivot and into a new normal that we are living right now. So the 5 stories that we'll hear today are speaking about FutureFit organization, but the future has probably changed and also made new challenges. So just to give some context, just in January, I remember meeting so many of my Chinese friends in London. Some of them got stuck over there because they could not return back to Beijing because of the outbreak of the corona. And the last EdTech Summit that I attended was the one early March in New Delhi. We were expecting 1,500 attendees from India alone, and only 400 arrived. And it was just, this is when I believe we knew that most probably the SUGSV will probably need to be postponed. So instead of meeting in person in San Diego, we now have this virtual meeting, and it's a pleasure to have with us Jonathan and Ophir and Ami and Shachar and Nirit. All of them are very good friends. Many participated in the Israeli summits from the very early beginning. And without further ado, I think that it's better if I move first to Jonathan, if I may. I remember our first meeting was sometime in 2014, and at that time everyone was talking about coding as a literacy. And then I remember you reminded me the title of your session at 2018. You probably should tell the title, but I think that when everyone said that the future needs to be in coding and coding as literacy, I think that the world has probably changed since then. So Jonathan, let's hear from you a little bit.
So I believe the title was, thanks for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually. So yeah, the title was Coding in Elementary Like Sex in High School. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing it. And the point was, well, 2 things. Like, that obviously it's important to start young with experiencing writing code, but it's also hard to create this environment that really allows kids at scale in elementary schools to get this real hand-on experience in coding. So I'll just rewind and I'll go really quick about the way that we did it in Israel, and now that it's being scaled globally, as an example of a young computer science talent strategy that was developed successfully in Israel and then scaled globally. So what happened is a year after we started CodeMonkey, SanDisk Israel, a large tech firm in Israel, they encountered a real business problem challenge. They were losing projects to other branches of SanDisk in other countries, mainly in India, simply due to their lack of ability to recruit enough coders for project locally in Israel. So they realized that there's a strategic issue here in Israel. And the way they decided to address it as a long-term strategy, they partnered with CodeMonkey and with the Israel education system and started those coding Olympics for schools. A 3-month-long event every year that later was adopted by the Ministry of Education. And then just like in 2 years, this model was developed, and you had every year around 250,000 students getting down to it, really cracking code for 3 months together in teams, solving problems, debugging every year during the school year in Israel. So that was a very successful example, Israel example, quickly solving this young talent nurturing challenge. Through CodeMonkey's acquisition by Tal Education Group in Beijing in 2018, this model has been replicated and scaled in China and globally. And that's CodeMonkey's story in a nutshell from the perspective of developing a model for young future job market fit talent nurturing.
Well, Jonathan, you connected here a few things together. I mean, on one hand, you mentioned the involvement of SanDisk. Many people are aware that the Israeli startup nation is a home of so many big and large corporations, naming Intel's and Apple and Google and Facebook and so on and so forth. And of course, engineers is one of the essence of a startup nation. But at the same time, you mentioned also the same context, also the Ministry of Education. Now, the Ministry of Education today think that the solution to everything that we have these days is a 4-letter word, Zoom. I mean, and definitely you cannot have 3 months of coding and teamwork, etc., doing Zoom. Ami, Afeka College is situated in Tel Aviv. It is involved in so many amazing projects, including, I know that you've done so many things during the Corona period, many groundbreaking.
The human capital. So I'm connecting to your question, which is, from my point of view, how do we educate engineers that fit current industry needs? While these needs are reflected in many surveys that I participated in and communicate with the high-tech industry, there was one point, the growing emphasis on skills on every survey. And when I'm referring to skills, what is called in the literature soft skills. Personally, I don't like the word soft. I'm calling them vital skills. The word soft is too soft. And I'm talking about multidisciplinary teamwork, self-learning, effective communication skills, etc. And I can give a 2 cents from my experience in the high-tech industry. I value them very much. So the question mark is, how do we educate engineers that from one side have a deep scientific and engineering knowledge, and on the other side have these skills that are essential for success in the high-tech industry? From the point of view of knowledge, I think that academic institutes in Israel are doing a good job for many years, providing deep knowledge, scientific, engineering, technology knowledge. So the main question mark or the main challenge for all of us is how do we provide these skills? And I would like to connect to Jonathan. From my point of view, these skills should be provided on the whole educational continuum, from birth or kindergarten to the workforce. And then there are two aspects that I think are very unique to Israel. I will describe them shortly. One is our culture. All our youth are questioning everything. They accept nothing as it is. It may have sometimes bad implication for us as parents, but for an engineer that deals with innovation and entrepreneurship, that's an excellent feature. Secondly, the mandatory military service, either in advanced technological units or in a commanding or position. From my experience, it contributes to developing the skills to the graduates that are arriving to us as students. So to try to look at my part in the academia, and I'm saying it for many years, academia must change. I'm leading a change in FECA, as you mentioned. We are, two examples, we are incorporating into the learning outcomes in the courses, the vital skills. Meaning a course has learning outcomes in the level of knowledge and the level of skills. That, of course, force us to define the skills, to change pedagogy and even evaluation methods. To conclude, I think that the whole education continuum should change, should put an emphasis on acquiring the skills. And I cannot ignore the period that we are facing. The virus, I think, is that opportunity for us not only to discuss how we teach online or frontal, to put a bigger question on the table, what do we teach and why do we teach it? Still, engineering is 4 years. It's not a stake. We can argue it. We can go to micro degrees or develop new methods in the academic.
Well, thank you very much, Ami. Ophir, I think that's, one of the things that I admit I like the vital skills versus soft skills. And Ami also mentioned the mandatory military service. And what I admire about what Shamayim is doing is that you're bringing a culture that you picked up in this mandatory service of the Israeli Air Force that is changing the culture of American unicorns. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, thank you, Yaki. So first of all, I want to connect what Ami said, because that's very interesting from my point of view. I recently read the book called Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell. Probably most of you read it. When he speaks about, that you need 10,000 hours in order to become a professional in what you do. And I think that's amazing insight, but that's probably insight that is relevant for the whole world. Okay, and going back to what Ami said, I think that it's crucial to give people skills and not only teach the work. If I'm taking it back to my experience when I was a pilot and flight instructor in the Israeli Air Force, we took 18-year-olds and made them pilots in the best Air Force in the world in less than 250 flight hours, which is about half of the world every time. And the way we did it is by not focusing on teaching them how to fly, focus on teaching them how to learn and improve. We called it debriefing culture, but being able to stop, reflect, and improve from everything you do is much more important, from my point of view, than anything else. I would prefer an engineer, in Ami's case, to write code like 3 times, but stop and improve from time to time, and not write like, code after code after code and repeat the same mistakes. And I think that if you look at today's world, especially post-COVID, but even pre-COVID, it's a world of a lot of uncertainty, repeated change, lack of time, and that's a world that you need to manage the day-to-day differently. And today, we see companies manage their performance or try to drive to results with measuring performance and with managing process, but not enough effort in improvement and how you focus on improvement. And today, and that takes me to something Nirit said in the preparation, today companies need a better, new, much more agile approach that is improvement focused in order to drive teams and individuals to results. And I think that's something we don't see enough today.
Well, definitely, I fully agree with you. And you mentioned the 10,000 hours, and I believe that that's my personal belief that today we live in a new world when people admire a short-term gizmos over a 10,000 hours investment in learning something. And so many people today call themselves experts, but they want to be experts. They're not necessarily experts. They don't have the 10,000 hours or not even the 1,000 hours. So Nirit, you spent so many years in one of the world's largest companies, Intel, and in a global HR positions. You have much more than the 10,000 hours as an expert. Can you give us a little bit from your experience and connect to the conversation how organizations need to be prepared now and how the academia, what Ami said, how you can relate to that?
Yes, and thank you, Yaki. And I want to go back to even your intro, you know, the question of what is FutureFit? It's really not surprising that the future has changed, right? Or our present has changed. We knew it was going to change. We just didn't quite know how and the vehicle. And I think we're all living in this great big gym where we need to figure out how to exercise these new muscles and redefine some of the things we've grown used to. So even the question of what is expertise, right? Is expertise training yourself 10,000 hours in the same thing so you can do it really well? Or is expertise creating, you know, some depth, but also enough breadth to recognize when you need to be moving that depth to new areas and when you need to be looking to your left or to your right and realizing that some things need to be unlearned and relearned. So, you know, as opposed to saying I'm an expert, so it's really important that I stick with this thing that I'm an expert in that no one no longer needs. I think this future fit organizations that we need to evolve, they're not about screens and they're not about remote and they're not about work from home. They're really about being agile, and agile means so many things. And what we're all living through these days is really a gym exercise in flexing agile muscles, in learning how to create the environment that allows people to connect and, you know, reconnect and then disband and connect in new ways. And we need to be able to bring different kinds of talent in the organization. We need to be able to bring learning in new ways, as opposed to, as Ami said, these classic 4-year degrees. And then, you know, we need to figure out agility in so many areas of how we define work, and then education is leading into that. And then, of course, other aspects of our lives.
Well, so Shachar, what can you add to this agility, and how do you see the future organizations, how they need to go, and from your experience?
So first of all, I agree with everything that's said. I think that the biggest challenge that we're seeing is that a lot of companies have been talking about agile for 2 decades. The word agile was not born yesterday. The challenge is most organizations are saying, oh yeah, we're agile, we're working, I don't know, some tool, and they think that makes them agile. I think agility is first and foremost a mindset. And if we're talking about future-proof organizations, it's not a tool, it's not a platform, it's really a mindset of understanding that everything is changing and whatever was done last year or 2 years ago is irrelevant. And part of it, and why we've started Stoke, is that understanding is that the people that you have in the organization today are not the people you'll need in the organization within 3 to 4 years. And the organization needs to be structured in a manner that constantly complements your organization with external talent. The skills that organizations need today and will need in the future do not exist within the walls of the organization. They're outside the walls of the organization because the skills that are required are not taught in classrooms anymore. To Ami's point and to Ophir's point, these are soft skills that are gained through experiences, through practice, and through working with multiple different organizations. That's where you pick up those skills. And what we're seeing today, to Nurit's point, sorry, it's not new. We call it future work. We call it a significant change. The reality is we've seen this transition happening over the last decade. The transition to remote work, the transition to freelancers in the organization is not new. What we are seeing is a 3 to 5 year process that was forecasted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, crossing 50% of the workforce being freelancers, independent contractors, now moving to a 3 to 5 month process because COVID accelerated it. In 2018, there were already 3,000 companies in the US without offices. Everyone was remote. They developed the methods, the skills, the techniques, the tools. We need to learn from them. The challenge is most organizations, to Nurit's point, are actually looking and trying to do the same thing they've done before, like most universities. Trying to do the same thing as they've done before, only through Zoom. And that's why it's bound to fail.
But, Shah, I'd like to ask maybe a provocative question, okay? And it goes back to the 10,000 hours, and I fully agree with what Ami said, that we need to look at everything as a continuum. One of the things that happened to me over the last couple of years is I became a grandfather. Okay, so now I have grandkids, and I start to look from a different point of view on what some people call a helicopter parenting. And you probably are familiar with this concept, I assume. The parents that don't allow their kids to do anything, they take care of everything that their kids need to do. Now, one of my observations, we like to give names. So we have the Y generation, the Z generation, the XY generation. I don't know. I mean, I never connected to all these generations. Are those generations for real, or are they just an invention of the academia or someone? Because, people say work-life balance. It's one of the questions that came from the audience. How can we improve work-study life balance for Y generation engineers? Maybe I'm giving here my personal judgment, maybe not opinion, even I have some judgment about it, is that today they don't have the patience to go through the 10,000 or to the 1,000. They call themselves sometimes experts very, very immediately, and they don't have the patience to go and dive deeper. And it's something that maybe we allow them to do, and we give them the flexibility. We call them Y generation, and we treat them with some gloves,
Yaki, let me try and intervene. Let's assume for a second you're right. And this is how the Y generation operates. I'm not going to argue whether it's true or not. Let's assume this is reality, what you're painting. What now? Are you going to try and fight it? This is the new reality. I'm talking to multiple friends that are founders, and they're hiring engineers with the assumptions that these engineers are leaving within 12 months. Because that's what they're seeing out there. You can say it's not right, you have to try and keep them. This is a new reality we live in, whether you want to tag it Generation Y, Generation Z, but this is the new workforce environment, operating model you need to operate within. Now the question, how do you future-proof your organization? Are you going to say, I'm not hiring Gen Y, Gen Z engineers? Are you fitting your organization to the new reality? Nurit, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, great. What do you say?
Yeah, I think I absolutely completely agree with you, Shahar. I think we've already been seeing the multi-talent, different kinds of talent in the organization. We've been seeing the growth of it, right? And And it's challenging. But the idea that if you as an organization need talent and the one thing you do is you open a rec and you go hire full-time hire, that's already been challenged. Now, what's happening around us these days is we're all learning to work remotely, which really is disconnecting work from a workplace. Once you start disconnecting work from workplace, you can start asking the question, so why do I need to hire that person to work remotely once I learn how to do that effectively and manage it effectively? And the tools will come around and they will get better than these screens, right? Once you do that, then the person no longer needs to be in the same country. Maybe they no longer need to be in the same time zone. Maybe they no longer even need to be speaking the same language. And you start asking the question, where is the best talent for this thing I need to do? And do I have the tools to pull them in? And so the question of who the talent is at your disposal as an organization becomes completely different from who do I have. And so it's really shifting that needle right on how do I get the right people on the right jobs at the right time with the right skills, which Ami is where you guys come in, right? And be able to do that and redo it and change that continuously as the needs change.
Yaki, I would like to comment on that if possible.
Of course.
Okay. First of all, I can give you what I'm doing with regard to the changing generation. I stopped using letters. In my slide, I'm calling them for several years already, Generation Now, because they are changing as a function of time, and I don't want to categorize it, but just as a remark. Now I'm trying to take the problem that you are talking about into the academia. From one side, our customers, the industry, has a completely different profile of engineers, which compared to what the academia is producing for many years. That's the output. I'm an engineer, okay? Now I'm looking also to the input. The generation has completely changed. So two main remarks. One, in nature, every system that the input has changed and the output has changed and has not adapted has become obsolete. And that's guiding me on making the change at the FECA. Secondly, I want them to learn. I want them to enjoy the process of learning. I personally think that excellence, reaching excellence and superiority can be relying only when you enjoy yourself. You cannot be excellent if you are suffering from your studies. So if the input has changed and the output has changed, we must change the education process in order to fit the new generation of students. If they cannot sit in a lecture for 3 hours, I want them to learn. I don't care how. I cannot invite you to see the campus, but we have completely renovated the campus and built learning spaces which fit the new generation. So yes, I think in connection to previous points that also academia, like industry and any other system, need to change and to adapt to the new generation without putting any specific letters or categorizing to groups. We are in exponential times. We need to develop exponential solutions to it.
I think to that point, Adam Grant, sorry for 1 second. Adam Grant at Wharton said a few months back that no one really works for a company anymore. People do things they want to do. Sometimes it's for this company, sometimes for that company, and it's the same thing from an academia standpoint.
Yeah,
I learn the thing that I want to learn, and I'll excel where I think I want to excel. And based on my success and capabilities, that's where life will take me. The process of trying to get people to work at the same place for 30 years, be mediocre, are fading away. There are alternatives. And I guess this is where Ophir's organization comes in to help promote it. And with that, I'll...
Yeah, I would just say, Shahar, you talked about the 12 months per employee per company, and you talked about the new tools that will be needed, and tell me about the academia. But I think one of the main needs will be if you have an employee that comes only for 12 months, how can you get him onboarded and trained and be effective as soon as possible? How can you get him, and that takes us back to the 10,000 hours, and how can you do it in like 10 hours? So what tools, what methodologies companies today build, or maybe, you know, back to what Tahal is doing, not companies, maybe what employees, what we as people, what kind of skills do we get in order to make sure that everywhere we go, we can be effective as soon as possible.
I agree, and to that point, you know, every time I talk to companies and they tell me, you know, what do you mean someone comes for a year? It takes us 3 months to train them. So are you fighting the 12 months or just fix the 3 months? Instead of trying to fight the 12 months, just trying to onboard them in 2 weeks. And the other thing is that quick start is what will determine, and in remote work becomes even more fundamental, because someone working remote, joining a company remote, whether freelancer or not, needs to very quickly bring value. If you don't bring value quickly, you're gone. There is no that emotional attachment cease to exist in the way we're operating today.
Shahar, this thing that you said, this emotional attachment, you know, one of the concepts I like is called emotional capital. I mean, that you build. What learning happens in a social environment. Also, teamwork happens in a social environment. Ami, you mentioned, you know, people doing things in corridors. I remember that as an engineer, we used to sit in the cafeteria on napkins and doing and finding solutions. Those interactions today are missing from Shachar, what you mentioned, the 3,000 organizations that are working completely remote. So definitely it does not fit everyone. Some people do need to have this social interaction. How can we create a hybrid organization, not necessarily just a remote organization?
Why is it one or the other?
No, it doesn't necessarily need to be one or the other. It's how can we create a hybrid organization? Or let me put it this way. I remember some years ago, I saw one of the titles was in one of the panels at the SUGS3 was Earn, Learn, Churn. And I liked it very much. And, you know, so HR people already knew some years ago that there is a dilemma with people that come to you, they earn, they learn, and then they leave you. So organizations need to adopt to that.
Yeah, as Steve Jobs said back then, what if they don't learn and stay?
Yeah, I think it's partly about what is expertise in this era and what is knowledge, right? Is it a certification that you've created because you spent 4 years in a certain school, right? Or is it something about continuously evolving your knowledge base, staying updated, letting go of what's irrelevant and learning new things? I think the big challenge we have, and it's a challenge for education as much as it is a challenge for organizations, is we don't know how to quantify knowledge when we don't have our hard credentials, right? Like the test to test the answers that I gave you so you can give them back to me, or the hard credential of a certain certificate. We don't know how to quantify or even measure, and then of course hire based on soft skills, right? We don't know how to test whether you are not smart, but things like working in teams or being able to stay relevant or flexibility. We don't know how to quantify these things. We don't know how to measure, test for them. We don't know how to hire for them. And until we do, we stick with those hard credentials. And then we say, here's something I know how to measure, so I'll give you the certification so you can go do that. I think once we learn, and I'm pretty sure we will learn, we're going to have to learn how to understand, and I agree with Ami, I don't like calling it soft skills because it sends us back to the old days. I think it's the different kind of skills. They're different than the ones that you acquire when someone tells you the answer and measures that you remember it, right? These are different skills. Once we start understanding how to call them, what they look like, how to measure and test for them, we will figure out how to bring people on board, integrate them, and then let them go, and then bring new people on board.
I will add on that, Daniel, because I think that's a great point. And the question is, does company today look for the right and relevant skills? As we said, we need people to get on board as soon as possible. So are we trying to assess their ability to learn and improve, their ability to learn something and get to a certain level of knowledge as soon as possible? I can give you an example, again, back from my aviation background. When you test people there, you don't look at their capabilities today. You look at their capabilities to improve. So you give them not one test, but 10 or 15 tests day after day, and you want to see how much they improve from one to the other. So it doesn't have to be 10 to 15, but if you're a company that wants to bring someone on board, give him 3 tests, but don't focus on just the results. Focus on how much they improve from one to the other.
It's a great point. You know, when I give examples to companies about what remote and distributed organization agility means, I give Automatic, the WordPress company, as an example. WordPress is a 350 people company distributed in 74 different countries, and 80% of the people are contractors, they're not company employees. The way that they onboard talent to the company is they hire someone as a contractor for a 2-week project. He works with the team. At the end of the first 2 weeks, the team is gathering and saying, do we want to keep working with this guy or not? If they say yes, he gets another 2 months contracting job. And after the 2 months, they make a decision whether, so it's that mindset. When I talk to companies about it, they're overwhelmed. It's like, but you know, we've been trained to hire people in a certain process. This is completely throwing it off the table. Yes, but it gives that agility and that thought process to actually find who fits the culture and how the company operates. And not try to predict.
Just to be fair, right? We have a lot of changes we need to make in the broader social systems to allow all this, because today when you hire what we call, right, temp workers, then you immediately go into the space of no safety nets. You know, they don't get the same benefits. There are a whole bunch of labor law issues around the world. But if you can think about a world, and we see countries dealing with COVID in various ways, including putting money out there and creating social safety nets, regardless of how you work, right? So if you think about an environment where countries provide social safety nets for people who work regardless of whether they're employed or work through gig economies platforms or work as freelancers, then this starts becoming an issue. And then flexibility becomes a two-sided street. It's not just about whether it's flexible for the company, it's also about I like, you know, being able to work a little bit of here and a little bit of there and do all these different things. If you take away the whole social safety net conversation.
Well, we have about 1 minute left, so allow me to wrap up before we are being cut off. So first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists. I'd like to thank you, Nirit, Ami, Ophir, Jonathan, Shachar, for joining this session this evening. Ami, I really like the vital skills and the generation now that you mentioned. I just want to maybe mention one more thing. We mentioned the Startup Nation, and Sol Zinger, the co-author of this book, he said over and over, what is these things about soft skills? We always, and the 21st century skills, we needed them also 3,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. The only thing that has changed is now that we give it a new name. But even like 3,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago, we needed to have teamwork, we needed to have collaboration. And definitely the fact that, yes, generations change. Every generation has criticism over the previous generation and the next generation. So we are not going to change this either. It is something that happens since the dawn of history. So I would like maybe to maybe say some final remarks is that definitely we are now in a turning point in a new normal. And